Okay. Okay, so real quick before we get started, I want to get some ideas on what we're going to do after Exodus, because we're getting pretty close to finishing up Exodus. So my plan so far is finish up Exodus. I want to do kind of a skim through of Leviticus. I think I've mentioned this before, where I'm just going to hit some of the main points. We're not going to go verse by verse through it. I won't put you through that. My next question, though, is what I'd like to do once we're done with our time in the Old Testament is to do the book of Hebrews, because I feel like that's going to be a really good one to cement everything that we've learned in this journey through the Old Testament so far. My question is, do you guys want to do the book of Numbers before we do the book of Hebrews, because that would finish out the life of Moses? So my question is, would you like to finish out the life of Moses, or are you done with Old Testament crazy Israelites and you want to move on to something else? I'm good with either way. I just figured I would ask you guys.
Certainly can read it on our own.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It goes through the whole, getting to the promised land, everything that happened there, wandering around the desert, and then coming back to the promised land. So that's kind of there's a lot that still happens within that. A lot of really good things that are good to go through. It would be very similar to what we've been discussing in Exodus. So it's kind of up to you guys. Deuteronomy is that's the last book of the 5 books that Moses wrote, and that's kind of Moses's speech to the people, to this new generation of Israelites, because all the old ones died off in the wilderness, in the desert, and so this new group of Israelites who are about to enter the promised land, it's his speech to them of remember what God's done for you. Remember the promises, remember, this and that. Remember the laws, and he kind of goes through the laws. So that's kind of what Deuteronomy is. Deuteronomy is almost like a recap of everything. But Numbers is got its own thing. So what do you guys think? Do you want to do Numbers? Do you want to go straight into Hebrews, and you can read Numbers and Deuteronomy on your own, if you wanted to?
I'd like to do Numbers just to wrap up Moses. That's just, I agree.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, sounds good. That's what we'll do. I didn't want to force more Old Testament on you if you guys were kind of done with it. It's different. It's a different speed than the New Testament stuff. Not that it's bad or wrong. It's just a different speed. So figured I'd ask. Okay, sounds good. We are in chapter 33 today of Exodus. All right, so the first thing that we have, verses 1 through 6, is God gives the command to leave Sinai. Now, this isn't going to actually happen until, he gives the command here in Exodus 33. The details of leaving Mount Sinai is the first 9, maybe, chapters of Numbers, and it details the whole, there's a census, all the different tribes and clans, everybody's duties, all of the packing up of stuff, the procession of everybody. It's a full 9 chapters of leaving, 2 million people leaving Mount Sinai in a very orderly fashion. So that is the recording of that. So here in chapter 33, God gives this command to leave Sinai and to follow his angel. You remember the angel that he had to lead them towards the promised land. We're going to come back to that after a little while. So even after this whole disastrous sin that just took place with the golden calf, God did not deny Israel the promised land or even his protection along the way, but he did deny them his presence, or at least his immediate presence. So if you remember, God was present in the form of like a pillar. I call it the pillar of protection because it was in the form of like a cloud. It was, fire at night. So that was what was within the camp of Israel. Somehow, I don't know how, I don't know what it looked like, I don't know where exactly it was, but it was within their immediate area. And now God is saying he is removing that immediate distance. We're in 33. Check here. He's not leaving, he's not abandoning them, but he's removing this immediate symbol of his presence, if you will. If you can imagine yourself as an Israelite, and all of a sudden this symbol, this pillar that has always been present through so much of what you've been going through, and all of a sudden it leaves, I think that would be very impactful, I think. And so I think that part of this is a test. This removal of his immediate presence, the symbol of his presence, is a test. If you remember the last chapter where Moses is talking to God on the mountain, and God tells the Israelites, he tells Moses about what the Israelites are doing with the golden calf. Do you remember the language that he used? He said he is going to just destroy them. He's going to wipe them out, and he's going to start over. And I feel like that language, that it was just so strong for something that God did not actually do. I think that was a test to Moses. It put Moses in a position to be a mediator, to be an intercessor. And I think that this is another test in a way. So God gave them his promises. He hasn't denied that. He gave them his protection. He hasn't denied that. But now he's removing his presence. What do you think would be the reaction of Israel as a whole to this? What do you think that the reaction would be to, we see it, their reaction to it. But what do you think that would reveal? Sorry, I guess is my question. How Israel reacted to God removing his presence, what do you think that says about Israel?
Like their heart or what their motivation is. Why are they following God?
Yes.
Is it for themselves or their own selfishness, or because they trust and love him?
Yep, absolutely. I feel like this was kind of a test. It kind of put the ball in their court, and it kind of said, it's revealing, like you said, the motivation behind it. What are you in this for? Are you in it for the blessings? Are you in it for the promised land? Are you in it for the presence of God and what that is for you? And so I think that's kind of what it did, is it put it on them to reveal the true nature of their heart. Yeah. Another thing I want to note in this, let's see, where was it? Where God says, sorry, I'm trying to find the exact verse it was in. 3. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. That's the wording there. This wording here pictures some sort of like ox or donkey that's resisting the farmer and making its neck stiff. And so I like that picture with that wording. I think that it really fully encapsulates the people. Okay, and then 4-6, verses 4-6, the people, this is their reaction to God's message. They mourn, and they don't put on their ornaments. The ornaments would have been jewelry. If you think about us in our society, if you're grieving, you usually look like someone who's grieving. You're not dressing up. You're not celebrating in any way. And so this would have been an outward appearance of what's in their heart. They're grieving the loss of God's immediate presence, and so the outward appearance would have shown that. This would have demonstrated a heart of repentance, and it was the first steps towards spiritual restoration in Israel. And I have a quote here. It says, "To be given every other blessing is of no value if God is not with you." What is the value of Canaan? What is the value of milk and honey? What is the value of having possessions? if God was not with them. They saw that the realization of the presence of God, having this fellowship and company, was infinitely more important than everything else. All right, any thoughts on these first 6 verses so far? Okay, we can move on to verses 7 through 11. This introduces the tent of meeting. If you remember, the tent of meeting is another way to say, it's another wording for the tabernacle. It was called the tent of meeting, tent of witnesses, tabernacle. This, however, is something different. This was a makeshift, temporary place of meeting with God, because the tabernacle, as you remember, has not been constructed yet. So Moses saw that the people were humbling themselves. He saw that they were showing that their hearts were turned to God, that they were repenting. And so this was Moses taking the next steps towards a restored relationship between the people and God. Remember, he's this mediator between God and the people. And so he took the initiative to seek God, to make his own tent of meeting outside of the camp, because that's where God's presence was no longer within the camp. And I think that the reason why he did not go up the mountain, remember in the past, he had always gone up the mountain to talk with God. And I think the reason why he didn't do this now is because he was not called. Every time he went up the mountain, he had been called by God. And so this was Moses taking the initiative. This was him reaching out to God and saying, please, I've made a place for you to meet me outside the camp. Will you please meet me here? I think that's what this was. And we see that the pillar of cloud, that presence came down to the tent of meeting. I think that another thing for the tent of meeting that Moses set up outside of the camp, I think that it also served a couple of other purposes other than just going to meet God. I think that one, it was a way for Moses to remove himself from the burden of the Israelites. I mean, he is the leader of 2 million rebellious, stiff-necked, argumentative, horrendous people, essentially. And I think that would have been a burden on him. I think that would have been just kind of worn on him. And then also think about just us. When we need to meet with God, we have to remove ourselves from the busyness of the day, from all the demands, all the things that are trying to get our attention. And that is when we can truly be in God's presence. And so I think that that's just something that Moses is also doing. He is removing himself from the busyness of the Israelites, and he is going somewhere private to meet with God. And then 2, I think that this was Moses leading by example. If you wanted to go and meet with God, you had to leave the camp, and you would leave and go to the tent of meeting. And Moses showed the example of this. Every single morning, Israel would stand outside their camp and their tents, and they would see him going to meet with God on their behalf. And I think that's an incredible example that he led. And so it shows that Moses not only made God his refuge, but it also made God his portion, because God was his priority. And, something that I wanted to note regarding the tent of meeting as it being outside of the camp is that it was typical in the ancient world for the sanctuary or the temple, whatever you want to call it, to actually be outside of the town a little ways. So for God to set up a system where the tabernacle and then eventually the temple was within the center of Israel, within the center of their camp, within the center of their region, whatever you want to call it, that was very unique. That was very unique to Israel specifically. That was not like any other culture. And so when God removed his immediate presence from the people, it took away that uniqueness, and it showed Israel exactly the difference of that. And, they lost the uniqueness of a nation whose God dwells within their midst. And I think that opened their eyes to that and made them want to, plead for God to come back.
Would that have been more like other gods that were idols that dwell far away? Or?
Yes. I think that there's certain cultures are where, their God lives on some faraway place, and that place is holy and no one's supposed to go there. I remember when I traveled in Nepal, there was actually a lake that was supposed to be sacred, and no one was supposed to ever go in it or touch it or anything. There was a fence around it. It was sacred. It was holy. There was gods in the lake. I don't know exactly the details of it, but we were able to go and visit. But no one was allowed to go and touch the water or anything. So I think that's part of it, is where some cultures, they just deem a certain area as holy. That's where the gods live, and that's holy, and that's not supposed to be touched. But then the cultures that did make temples where you could organize a worship to a certain god, then those temples were outside of the residential town area. Yeah.
Now they were just like everybody else.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Okay. In verse 11, God spoke to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And in Numbers 12:8, it clarifies on this, saying, "With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord." And I think that this means that he had unhindered communication with God. With prophets, God speaking to prophets, he spoke to them in dreams and in visions, and a lot of the things that he spoke to prophets were prophecies, and they didn't make a whole lot of sense to anybody at the time. With Moses, it was different. He spoke very clearly, plainly. A lot of what God spoke to Moses was instructions for the here and now for Israel, and so it wouldn't have been riddled in any way, I think. But I also think that it was just more of an immediate presence kind of thing. At least that's kind of what it seems to be describing. All right, and then verses 12 to 23 of this chapter is a dialogue between Moses and God. The first thing that we see is that Moses prays for the people, and he's almost negotiating with God in a sense. It's kind of what it sounds like. He's almost negotiating for God's presence. In verse 12, Moses tells God, "You say to me, bring up these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me." And yet in verse 2, it just said that God was going to send the angel before them. So I think here Moses is wondering exactly who this angel is. If you remember from the first time we talked about the angel of the Lord, that angel of the Lord was very unique in that he spoke for God. He had the judgment of God, and he had God's name in him. And that, to me, says that that's Christ. But either way, whether you agree with me or not, that's clearly a very special angel, whether you agree with me or not. And so I think Moses is asking God here, exactly which angel? You just removed your presence from the people, so is this going to be like the angel from before that has God's name in him? Or is this going to just be some other random, not important angel, Because for Moses, the focus and the center of everything that he is talking about is, will God be with Israel? That is the only thing that is on his mind, is will God be with Israel, and the presence of God with his people. That was what Moses was all about. And he knew that the promised land was nothing special if God was not present with his people. And so this is what he's advocating for, is not just for God to lead them to the promised land, but to remain with them. That is what everything is about here. The second thing in this dialogue between God and Moses is God promising his presence. So verse 14, God answers Moses' question about the angel, saying, "My presence will go with you," meaning that this angel is in my opinion, the pre-incarnate Christ and not just some other angel. This is huge. I mean, for God himself to be with them and leading them and remaining with them, and not just some, other messenger that God could have sent. I think that says a lot. But then at the end of that, after he says, my presence will go with you, he says, and I will give you rest. And I think that, obviously, I think this probably means rest from travels, meaning they settle in the promised land. There's Hebrews 3. Hebrews chapter 3 talks about how the promised land was the rest for Israel. But I think that there's more to it, because the promised land was not going to be the end of Israel's troubles. There was going to be troubles along the way. There was going to be troubles and struggles once you get there. And this was a baby nation. They had just received so many laws and so many regulations, and they had so much to figure out, so much to learn, so much to do just to get to the promised land, and then so much to do once they got there. There was so much ahead of them. I think that the rest is not just the promised land itself, but the presence of God, and that is where you will find true rest. True safety and rest is not found in the absence of dangers and struggles. It's found in the presence of God. And like I said, Hebrews 3 talks all about that. And I know Charles just did a sermon on Hebrews 3, and then Psalm 95 is what Derek read that morning, and those go together really, really well on that topic. Verses 15 to 16, Moses again negotiates for God's presence with Israel. It was not enough to be a people belonging to the Lord. Moses argued that God's presence among his people is the only thing that makes them distinct from other nations. And God agrees to this request, punctuating it by saying, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. This is a very personal thing for God to say. What do you guys think about this? Where God tells Moses, not only that he has found favor, but I know you by name. What do you think that means?
That he knows him intimately, that he really knows who Moses is.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been reading a lot, especially with our journey through the Old Testament, about what a name is to a person, right? We've seen it just in the life of Jacob alone. What was the meaning of his name? Something like he who grasps the heel, or something like that. And that's essentially what his life was he was sneakily grabbing and reaching for things that weren't rightfully his. And so he lived up to his name. So a name was the embodiment of a person's nature and character, their whole person, their identity. And so for God to say, I know you by name, I think that it means that he knows, not only that he knows, but he has authority over someone's entire being. Because even within Jacob's life, God gave him a new name, right? So he had authority over Jacob's name and essentially who he was as a person. So I think that means that God knows and has authority over the very nature, the very core of a person, and he knows the depths of our being. And he knew with Moses that Moses' deepest desire was to draw closer to God, to seek God. That was all Moses was about at this point. So the last thing, that brings us to the last thing that's in the dialogue. Verse 18, Moses asks a very bold request. He says, please show me your glory. Boy, that takes a lot of guts, I think. Actually, the interesting thing is the Hebrew word here for glory is the word kabod, and it literally means weight. The weight, the full manifested weight of God's glory is what he's actually requested. And I think that that's really interesting, because my first thought was he doesn't really know what he's asking. And to an extent, he doesn't know what he's asking. No one can comprehend this, and so you don't know fully what you're asking for. However, the language here shows that he is asking for the full weight of God's glory on him. And that's a huge, huge thing. So far, Moses has been making a lot of bold requests of God. And so far, God's been granting them. I think Moses is going three for three here. He's going for the full, he's just rolling them out. He's like, okay, let's keep this ball rolling. This is a huge, bold, and brave request. And so verse 19, God promises to reveal himself as a God of goodness and grace and mercy. And I think this shows that the Father will bend down to the level of the child and reveal all of his goodness to him. That was a very gracious response to a very bold request. And I think that this gives Moses a deeper insight into the heart and the character, and specifically the name of the Lord, because remember, name goes two ways. God knows our name and what that all means. For God to reveal and to proclaim his name to Moses then is giving Moses an insight into the very heart of God. And that's, I think, lost on us sometimes because we've spent, for the most of us, the majority of our life knowing who God is through his word. It's a great privilege of ours. For Moses, though, I think this would have just all been new and exciting, and not really sure how else to put it into words, but yeah, I think just, I guess, different. I'm not really sure how else to put it into words. What do you guys think so far?
When he says he's gonna pass, all his goodness is gonna pass. Goodness is not a tangible, I mean, it's not concrete.
Right.
And so I thought, how is God gonna do that?
That's an
It's
interesting thing,
through-
isn't it?
So his presence had to radiate that, which, we can't figure how that would be, to
No.
just have a presence that you knew was nothing but goodness.
Yeah. Isn't that incredible?
It's like, you can't see goodness,
Right.
but that's what God says he is gonna see.
Of all the things for God to show Moses, he chooses things that, like you say, are not a visible item. The goodness and the mercy and the graciousness of God. Yeah, how do you visually see that?
And how that would affect Moses
Right.
being exposed to that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, yeah. Yeah.
Which makes me always wonder when people were in the presence of God or in the presence of Jesus, how could they not have been changed?
Yeah.
Because that goodness would have been in Jesus.
Yep. That's exactly
He was
right.
all God, all man.
Yep. He was, what is that, 1 John, or no, sorry, not 1 John, John 1, talks about how Jesus was the fullness of the glory of the Father, full of grace and truth. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I wonder, for everything that Moses is experiencing here, what was that compared to, not to lessen this in any means, but what was that compared to what was present in Jesus? I don't know. It's a question and a wonder, but yeah. If they were the same, if it was just a taste, if it was more or less, I don't know. So verses 20 to 23, this is where God's he hasn't done it yet, but he's making a plan for Moses to be able to see his glory. And so he's telling him, Moses couldn't see God's face and live, meaning you can't look upon the unveiled glory of God. So God made a way to protect Moses when he would pass before him. God's glory would pass by Moses, and Moses would be protected by not only the hand of God, but also the rock that God provided for him to hide in. And it makes me think of that hymn, Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. So, great hymn, by the way. And so we've got this rock of refuge, we have the hand of God. After God passes by, Moses would be permitted to see an appearance of God's back. interesting thing. I don't know if you know this. God doesn't have a body. So what do you guys think about this? Because specifically, of all the words that Moses could have used to describe this, he says his back.
He's also saying he's gonna hide his face.
And his hand with his.
I mean,
Right.
his hand is physical
Yeah.
attributes to a person
Right.
that
Yeah.
he wasn't in the form of an angel here.
I don't
Or-
think so, because it's, remember, he's gonna show his goodness and his,
Yeah.
you know, all these things that are, I think that if he was gonna appear in the form of an angel, I think it would have said that, because that's not language that's lost. I think that the little detail that we have here shows that it's not something that can be easily described. At least that's what I'm gleaning from it. I don't know, for this section, I don't have a lot of answers for you guys, to be honest. I don't, and I'm not going to pretend like I have answers. I'm not going to be making things up and pretending like I have answers. But the best ideas that I have on this for what Moses saw is like almost an after effect of God's glory that passed by. And I don't know how he would comprehend the goodness of God in it. I don't know how he comprehended the mercy of God in it, the graciousness of God in it. I don't. But something happened, and the only thing that I can come up with is it's some sort of like bad wording, but afterglow of God's presence after because he passed by, and it's something that's remaining. I don't know. What do you guys think? It's a tough one. I
Maybe
know.
we just had to put it in human, something we could grasp.
Sorry,
If
Tracy.
someone has gone by, you probably are just going to see, you would see the
That didn't help you at
backside.
all.
I don't know.
It's Zachary, yeah.
Are you glowing tonight?
She
Last week it was Denise, shiny Bible.
It's the cursed chair. Okay, sorry. Could you
Yeah,
say
I
that
don't
again?
know if it's just like Moses had to put somewhat of a human aspect on it so that we could grasp it.
Yeah.
If you can't see his face and he has passed by, the only thing that we could understand would be his backside.
Right. Right.
Since you can't see his face and
Right.
someone has passed by, but I don't know.
Right. I think
Just
it's that.
somehow so we can grasp it, otherwise.
Yes. I think it's that, what did I say, anthropomorphic language that I said last time, where it's like man-centered language that we're using the words that we have available to us to describe things that are outside of that. We're using what we got, you know, and I think that you're right on the money on that one. Yep.
So why does God say, you see my face, they'll die? You see my face, you'll die?
I
I
think
don't
that
get
would
it.
be
That's true.
the fullness. Clearly, Moses did not see the fullness, the completely unveiled, fullness is the only word I have for it, of God's glory. And so he saw an after effect of it, something that's, I'm struggling here.
Well, like you can't understand everything God knows, so it would be like him unveiling everything in the world, like to knowing every single thing, do you think? Like it's more of a knowing or an understanding in your heart versus an actual physical seeing of a face? I don't know.
I don't know if
Because he
it's-
doesn't have a physical being, so it's
Right.
like, that's what's, like, do you think it was a feeling that Moses maybe understood a little more, had a better grasp of God and felt different? Maybe, I don't know, because like you said, how do you see a face? Like,
Right.
Yeah, I don't know, I always wonder that too.
If he's showing his fullness, why would someone have to die?
Because he's a holy God and we are sinful people. And I think that's about the only thing I could come up with on that one, is that there's still that separation when we, yeah, that's pretty
We're
much all.
not
I'm
meant to
saying.
know everything on earth, or know all about God's glory on earth.
Right. But even beyond knowing, I think it's just a being.
Like being that close to
Separation.
him,
Right.
physically.
Separation, yeah. Did I make things better, or did I make things worse there?
So we won't know until we die.
Right, yeah. I tell it to
I can
Zeke.
accept that.
I tell it to Zeke all the time. Ask him when you get there, buddy. Because he will just, why, until I've got nothing left in me. So, yeah, I think we're going to leave that one alone at this point.
I don't hear it in a burning bush. Was it a physical bush? Because I mean, that's a physical,
Mm-hmm.
he showed himself that way as opposed to just for Moses. I don't know.
But was
Is
that,
I don't know.
but was that the undisguised presence of God, or was that the presence of God made known through nature? Because there would be a difference there then. And I think that's what sets this apart, is it's an undisguised, that's why I keep using the word unveiled. It's not hidden in any way.
Not hidden in a bush.
Not hidden in a bush, not hidden in whatever, not hidden in, not disguised as a pillar of cloud, not disguised as, those are all things that God manifested his presence to Israel so that they had something that they could visibly see. He met them on their turf, essentially. But this is something different, clearly, because it doesn't say. Like when God passed before Elijah. He passed by him in what was it, a tornado, a hurricane, I don't know, wind, rain, something. I don't remember exactly, but it was all natural things, and then he passed by him in a gentle whisper. I think that's clearly setting this apart. And whatever it is, whatever it may be, it's setting it apart as something that's different. I could be wrong. Quick disclaimer, I could be wrong.
Verse 15, I marked that and into 16, but I put a little star there because I thought, wow, I think that's how I feel. If thy presence does not go with me, do not lead me there. Just, I don't want to go. Sometimes I may sound like I want to go, or act like I want to go, but I don't want to go. I don't want to be there.
Truly reveals where your heart's at. Like here, Moses is truly saying, there's nothing that is going to bless us like your presence. No matter what this land may hold for us, no matter, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing is going to compare to having your presence with us. And that was a test to the Israelites too, what's the state of your heart? Are you in it for the blessings? Or are you in it for God's presence? Yeah. Yep. Any other thoughts on chapter 33? All right, let's head into chapter 34 then. Verses 1 through 9 shows God keeping his promise to show his glory to Moses. But first, Moses needs to cut new tablets to replace the old ones that he broke and bring them to the top of the mountain. So, quick recap question, why did Moses break the first set of stone tablets?
Wasn't he angry about the golden calf?
Yes, exactly. So, new question. If God himself provided and inscribed the old tablets, why is now he requiring Moses to be the one to craft them and to bring them up and to inscribe them?
Might be what we have our kids do if they've done something. Okay, we'll provide it again, but here's
Just
the
thought I'd teach
condition.
you.
Here's the condition. You're gonna need to,
Yeah.
put some ownership in this.
Ownership, yeah. I think that's good. definitely including Moses as part of the process, I think is a big part of it, in the way I see it. What do you guys think?
Well, usually when you write something, you remember it better.
Good point.
I mean, God gave him the commandments. If Moses could reiterate those right away, that was a good sign that he already knew them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But it says that Moses has to chisel out the tablets. And the way I read it, God will write the words on them. Unless I read it wrong. Chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke, bad boy.
Yeah, I love the way, which you shattered. BTW.
Maybe I read that wrong, I apologize.
Be ready in the morning,
What verse is that?
34.
I always wrote it that way too, but I wonder now what she said.
34.
So,
Does he just have to
verse
like physically get the
27.
tablet out?
Verse 27, the Lord said to Moses, write these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights, and he neither ate bread nor drank water, and he wrote on the tablets the word of the covenant, the 10 Commandments.
That is confusing though.
I love
It
it.
says, I will write them out in the same, yeah. Like, was she?
Maybe there's a portion that
changed
God
his
wrote,
mind.
maybe there's a portion that Moses wrote. What'd you say, Denise?
He changed his mind.
Again. Yeah, I don't know. I took it that Moses wrote them, but maybe God wrote a portion and maybe Moses wrote a portion, or maybe the wording's a little iffy on that one. Just, translating from the original, who knows?
Did any of your sources say that he did in fact write them, or?
My commentaries didn't really go into detail on who exactly did what, but they spoke as if Moses was the one. The way that they talked about it, it was as if Moses was the one that did the writing.
I thought I always learned it that way too, but
Right, but
it's interesting.
yeah, but they didn't nothing in the commentaries pointed at this and said, this is a weird, contradiction,
Yeah.
It didn't say anything about that, so must not be important. My thoughts on Moses doing his part of this process of the tablets and everything is that God is introducing a human mediator element into this process of a new covenants, new set of covenant tablets for Israel, and a restored relationship with the people. I think that this speaks to what Paul talks about, the old covenant and the new covenant in 2 Corinthians. And we can talk about that in a little bit. But where he's talking about the old covenant, is faded. It's fading away. It's not permanent. This new covenant is permanent. It's here to stay, and it was brought about through the element of a mediator, Jesus, who came as a human. I think that there's elements in it. I could be wrong. Bye, Vicki. Thanks for coming.
I'm not leaving out of anger.
I'm sorry for whatever.
Those tablets. I told you so.
You're gonna pay for that. Oh my goodness. Okay, we'll move on from that topic. We'll keep going. Okay, so God descends in a cloud to speak to Moses, and he shows his glory to Moses. We talked about that, proclaiming his name and its implications. That's verse 6 to 7. And some of the things that it says about his name, because it tells us plainly the truth of his name. He is a God who is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. He keeps love and forgiveness for thousands. and he will be by no means clear the guilty. Sin has consequences for multiple generations. So God reveals the truth of his judgment on a sinful people, combined with the grace of a new covenant to restore them to himself. So not only is he rescuing a needy people, but he's restoring and cohabiting. How do you say that? Cohabitating. Thank you. With the blatantly rebellious people. Verses 8 to 9, Moses responds in worship, and he once again begs God to stay among his people. Moses recognizes that this cannot happen unless God pardons their sins. Why do you think Moses keeps begging God for his presence with the people? This is like the 4th time. Every time God's like, yeah, I said yes. So why do you think he keeps asking him?
I think he realizes they're nothing without God being there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's kind of simplistic, but.
No, I think you're right.
The people haven't figured it out, at least Moses has.
Yes. And Moses of all people, right? He's the one spending the most time with God. And the more that he knows God, the more he's going to realize just how sinful and wretched that they are, how we are without God. And so I think that we do this pretty often ourselves. We ask God things day after day, and knowing full well that his faithful goodness is with us, but we still ask him, things day to day. So I think that there is some common ground there. Verses 10 to 28 is a speech by God in response to Moses' pleading. And the topic of the speech is in verse 10, where, let's read it real quick. Says, "Behold, I am making a new covenant. Before all your people I will do marvels such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation, and all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing that I will do with you." Sorry, I struggled there. So this renewed covenant involves a promise and then a series of 8 laws that are repeated from earlier in the book of Exodus, and I'm just going to list them out here. We don't have to read them. There's the promise to drive out the nations of the promised land. He tells them, don't make any covenants with the inhabitants of the land. He tells them, don't make gods of cast metal. He tells them to celebrate the feast of unleavened bread and redeem the firstborn. He tells them to rest on the 7th day each year. That's the Sabbath. Each week. I apologize, each week. He tells them to celebrate 3 festivals each year. We'll go into the festivals at a later date. He tells them to include no leaven in sacrifices or allow no leftovers from feasts. He tells them to bring the best of the first fruits into the house of the Lord. And the black sheep of all of them, don't boil a young goat in its mother's milk. That one we just keep coming back to. Why do you think that God repeated the promise and these 8 random laws? Why do you think that he did that?
Maybe just to be totally clear with what he expected. This is what I'm gonna do, but this is what falls on you. Just.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a new covenant, but don't think that anything that I said prior is not in effect anymore. It's all still valid and active, and I think you're right on the money there.
Plus, these are stiff-necked people. It wouldn't hurt just come around one more time. Go through it one more time. I mean, he knows what he's dealing with.
At least.
So it's not gonna do any harm.
Yeah.
Cover the ground again.
Yep. I think they might need a few more times. Yeah. All right, verses 29 to 35, it talks about the shining face of Moses. This to me is really fascinating. So Moses is on the mountain for another 40 days, 40 nights. He fasted from food and water the entire time. And then Moses returned with the renewed covenant from God, and he's got these new tablets with the laws. And he doesn't look like he should look after 40 days and nights of fasting from food and water. He doesn't look sickly or malnourished. In fact, he's glowing. That is not what was expected at all. This is totally a physical effect of close communion with God. But the radiance that's reflected is not his own, right? The only other time that we've seen this in the Bible where someone's face is glowing is Stephen before he is martyred. So I think that that's interesting. The people, as all people do, they respond in fear. And this is the same response that they had to, if you remember, the unmediated glory of God when God spoke to them the 10 Commandments. That was God speaking to them directly, and it terrified them. This is another moment where they can see the close up, the physical effect of God's incredible presence, and what that did to Moses' physical features, and it, of course, scared them. So Moses, he calls them over, and they eventually come near, but eventually Moses veils his face, except for when he is speaking with God in the tent of meeting. He unveils his face for that. And when he gives the people God's instructions, he unveils his face for that. So I have a couple of questions regarding this. Why do you think that Moses' face shone now at this time when he talked with God and not in previous times when he talked with God? He's spoken with God in the tent of meeting. He's spoken with him on the mount before. Why do you think now is when his face shines instead of other times?
Is this after God had shown him his goodness?
Yes.
I mean, was it something he absorbed or was reflective?
Sorry, I'm laughing at the word absorbed. Possibly, absolutely. That is clearly something that would, I would think, leave a lasting effect, possibly physically, like you said.
I keep thinking of the movie Twilight, and embarrassingly, yes, I've watched it. Like the vampires are like sparkling. No one else has seen it. No. Oh, sorry. And like I said, it's embarrassing that I watch it, but they like shine in the light and they're iridescent and they sparkle. So I keep thinking of that. Like you said, he absorbed his goodness. I keep thinking of that in my mind.
Moses has a sparkly face.
Yes, I'm sure that's not what it is, but.
Edit this out of that YouTube thing.
Yeah, that's
And
not true.
there's a quick
Not
little
accurate.
bleep.
Not accurate.
For those of you who are listening in, that wasn't Lindsay Weber at all. That was
Tracy Rep.
Yeah.
Glowing. Is this the longest that he had been in God's presence too?
No, he was up on Mount Sinai 40 days and 40 nights the first time he went up for the tablets. So this was another 40 days and 40 nights up on the mountain for this one.
Does it have to do with maybe, I mean, the more we develop a relationship with Christ, his light shines out of us. I mean, the more you develop a relationship. So he has developed a close relationship with God.
Yeah.
Like a very close relationship.
Yeah,
At
absolutely.
this point, it's not like the first time he met him and boom, he changed his
Right.
outward appearance.
Right.
So
This has been.
they've spent time together.
Yes. This has been, if we look back on Moses' life, it's been like this incredible transformation that's been happening where he's learning more and more to trust God. He's learning more and more that he longs for the presence of God. It's this increasing thing, totally different from the Moses that we were first introduced to, you know? And so I think that you're right on that. There's something to that. And I think that you could also be right, Marilee, that it has something to do with this physical passing of
Well,
God's
the one
glory.
verse, the end of 29, it says that the skin on his face shone by reason of his speaking with him.
Right.
So, just
Yeah.
being in his presence again, like Tracy said.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay, here's my other question about the veil then. So, I don't know about you, I always thought that the veil on Moses' face was to protect the people from the radiance of shining out from his face. But we see that Moses takes the veil off to speak to the people. And then he puts it back on when he's done speaking to the people. So why do you think that he's got this veil that he is putting on after he is done speaking to the people?
Well, he takes it off when he's speaking to the people on behalf of God. Isn't that what it said? So when he is representing God, then the people get to see.
That would be compelling.
But then why is he putting the veil on afterwards?
Because then it's just Moses in charge, or Moses speaking.
Oh, that's a really good thought. I like that.
It says here Moses did not want the people to see his glory fading away,
Yes.
so that they would continue to honor him as God's representative and be less likely to turn to idols again.
Yep, that's exactly right, Lois. And that is from Paul speaking in 2 Corinthians again. He talks about how Moses put a veil over his face so that the children of Israel could not see the fading of the glory. They would not see what's coming to an end. And that's where he talks about the old covenant versus the new covenant. That's 2 Corinthians. You can read it. We're not going to read it tonight, but he does talk about the real purpose of the veil. And I think that you're onto something, Marilee, about how he has it off when he is the ambassador, I guess, of God, and then puts it back on when he is not. But I think obviously what we can glean from Paul in 2 Corinthians, talking about the glory fading. So the mediator of the new covenant, Moses, he brings with him and reflects a glory that's not his own, and yet the glory is not permanent. And that must mean that there is something else that's better that is still to come. And this just shows that Moses is not the promised seed that Israel's been looking for, all these years. But okay, quick, really, really interesting fact. I love this fact. Okay, so I love this. This is hilarious. The Hebrew verb for the word shone, when it talks about how Moses' face shone, how it's got like beams of light or rays of light, that word literally means shot forth beams, but it's super close to the word for horns in Hebrew. And so medieval literature, because thanks to the Latin Vulgate, from mistranslating it, medieval artwork of Moses literally shows him having horns. You can Google it. It's terrifying. It's kind of funny, actually. But it's so weird, because you'll see this beautiful picture that's painted, and it's supposed to be this beautiful picture, but then there's Moses having these little devil horns over on him. And it's the weirdest thing. Michelangelo made a statue of Moses, horns on his head. It's a beautiful statue, except for the horns. Isn't that the weirdest thing? I thought that was hilarious, actually. And that's where we're going to end tonight, actually. Any questions or remarks or thoughts, complaints? Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to finish with chapter 40, and that's where we're going to just end Exodus. And then I'm just preparing some things in Leviticus that we're going to go through, talking about sacrifices, talking about the priests' garments, because we never did go through, is it Exodus 30? 33? No, we just went through 33. Where am I? 39. No, never mind. Hold on. I'll find it, just a second. 28, that's where we're at. That talks about the priestly garments, but I wanted to do more than just the garments. I wanted to do some of his duties as well, and that's covered in Leviticus, the sacrifices, and then the festivals, or the feasts, whatever you want to call that. And I figured that will kind of just give us all the main points through Leviticus. So we'll do that next after we finish Exodus 40. Any questions? Any thoughts? Complaints? Okay. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this time together. We're really thankful for your continual presence with us through the Holy Spirit and the constant communion that we have with you through the intercession of Jesus. We ask that we would continue to reflect your glory to those around us, and that we would never want to be going anywhere without you leading us, Lord. And we ask this all in your holy name. Amen. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Michelle.
Appreciate it.